I just watched the most hopeful webinar imaginable. But first, I want to mention that last night I slept really well. I had a dream that I was talking quite sternly with the psychiatrist who overmedicated me last April. I remember that. I don't really remember what I was saying, but I might have had some pretty strong words. And I don't remember that I was being rude. I was just quite upset with the way I was treated. And along those same lines, in a way, this webinar was about the antidote to a lot of this. A lot of what I've talked about with myself and self-dialogue in terms of the system and troubles and problems in the system would largely be eliminated if what they were talking about in this webinar was implemented on a wide scale. The trouble is, it's implemented on a very, very tiny scale in the United States, and they were talking about it, and without further ado, the webinar was on self-directed funding in mental health, and they already have it in some other healthcare sectors in the United States. 1.1 million people are using self-directed funding, meaning there's a certain amount of funding one would get if one had a certain struggle or diagnosis or what have you, and then the person, with the help of a broker, can create a plan and put funding towards what one would like to participate with in terms of how they're going to get better. And that could be almost anything. And they didn't talk too much about examples of what that might look like, but they did in the webinar. It's a Mental Health Commission of Canada webinar. It'll probably be on their website soon. And there is a website called selfdirectedmentalhealth.org, and it's not even live yet apparently, but it's going to be about this. And what I loved about it is every single thing they said I completely resonated with, and that doesn't happen that often. It happened when I listened to the Peer Movement in Mental Health course by Emma Bragdon on her Integrated Mental Health for You website, and even the last webinar I listened to about social enterprise and mental health. Just some of the way people spoke kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I even asked the question in the webinar, just by typing it, about whether a person has to be taking medication to access this self-directed funding, if it was ever available. And the 1.1 million people who are using self-directed funding in the United States, only 1,000 people total are people with mental health diagnoses as their primary concern. So someone might be an elderly person with self-directed funding and have a mental health concern, but they're accessing the self-directed funding through the fact that they're a person of elderly age range at this point in time. So this whole idea of self-directed funding is very new and very small. And I remember actually reading that Australia is doing stuff around this, and New Zealand, and I didn't know that the United States was doing anything like this. So I kind of feel like in 5, 10, or 20 years, this self-dialogue with myself, having to hide coming off medications or having to do it without support, and that's something I was just talking about. And in the webinar they were mentioning, with the right support, anyone can self-direct. Meaning, you can't just say, here's your money and go self-direct, but if a person's really supported, they will be able to put together a plan and utilize funding in order to move towards recovery, if you want to use that word, in the exact way that they want. So in my example, I'm actually thinking about if I was to create a sort of self-directed something for myself, even though I'm not going to receive any self-directed funding. I'm already doing things that are self-directed for my own so-called recovery. I'll use that word for now. So going to California for 5 months is part of that. It's living the dream I had before I ever was diagnosed with anything. And taking Hardy Nutritionals with the vitamin C and the amino acids, which is costing me probably about $200 a month right now. Maybe I would actually get funding for that, because that is my choice about how I would like to support my biochemistry and not taking medications. And it sounds like in this self-directed model, I would have that kind of support financially. I would have that kind of support in terms of the people around me. They would be supporting me to reach my goals, which are to be off medication for as long as possible. And if I ever have to go back on it, make it as short as possible and then work again towards not being on it. Not saying, oh, well, since you had to go back on it, that means you have to be back on it forever. I don't agree with that. So the people speaking the webinar were really positive and really sounded like they knew exactly what they were talking about, and talked about all the positive outcomes that are happening with self-direction in terms of the studies. And the studies aren't perfectly meticulous studies or anything, but they're saying threefold increase in things like employment, housing, and something else. But quality of life is so much better. Of course it is. If somebody's given an amount of money to create something that they understand will work best for them, of course the outcome's going to be better. Than you should go to this group, just do whatever program and take these meds, and you don't get any money for anything that you think would help you. So you can live in poverty and just get by and have these services that we've created out of some kind of evidence base. But where does that even come from if it's not coming from the people that live through it? So hopefully self-direction would also include helping people taper off if they want to, and a person being able to utilize a naturopath or something to help taper off, or using these micronutrient support lines such as Hardy Nutritionals and EMP. And perhaps part of what I can have a dialogue with myself about in this next while, something that actually got me kind of going, was talk about things that I include in my own self-direction without the self-directed funding, and talk about other things I've tried in the past and things that I'd like to try if I maybe had the funding, and sort of paint a really big picture of possibilities, so when self-directed funding does come in, we're already talking about it. Imagine if we're already talking about what we would do if we had self-directed funding before it even comes in, and just getting in that mindset that we really have a right to design our own path to wellness. And if each person gets, I don't know how much money a year for healthcare in mental health, and they get a clinician, a social worker, an occupational therapist, a rec therapist, a mental health worker, clubhouse services, medications, a psychiatrist, a clinician, maybe we don't want all of that. And all those things are so expensive. And if we could just take a small portion of that or half of that and actually put it towards something that we would be excited about reaching and moving towards as a hope and a dream, or a goal, if you want to call it a goal, then of course that's going to help a lot more. So there was a multi-state study about self-direction in behavioral health. And there's a Florida self-directed care approach, and it's about choice, recovery, independence, identifying your own goals for changing your life with adequate support. And they said everyone with support can self-direct, and everyone is unique and knows what's best for them. And that's a basic premise, along with everyone can self-direct with support. And to me, that's just so brilliant. And that's my basic point too with this whole coming off med thing, is everyone is unique and knows what's best for them. And I knew those extra drugs and that being drugged up on Seroquel wasn't best for me last April. And I was right. Here I am over a year later, haven't been back to the hospital, haven't taken daily high doses of antipsychotics. I was taking them for probably 2 months at a lower dose here because I'm in California and I can't really risk getting out of control. But now, because of that, I have tapered off with the help of Hearty Nutritional Support and their micronutrients. And right now it has to be a big secret. And maybe one day this will just be natural for someone to choose something like micronutrients. And if I had self-directed funding, I would probably do a lot more for my wellness. I would definitely divert some of the funding that I've gotten towards clinicians and things like that, towards things that actually would increase my wellness and increase my happiness and help me reach my goals in life. And doing that is going to be the buffer for anything that, if there are any kind of reoccurrences of any kind of troubles, if I have a good life going, it's going to make it that much easier to get back to or want to get back to. And I've said before when I share my story sometimes is, for me, recovery is like a mountain, because it's like building a mountain. So if I build a nice mountain of a life and I tumble down to the bottom, I just have to climb back up the mountain. I don't have to rebuild the whole mountain. So it takes a bit to climb back up the mountain, but I've already built this mountain of a rich life that is something to want to get back to. And that's not the only factor, that's oversimplifying it, but it just made me really excited to hear this webinar, because I know that that is exactly what would have helped me. And I feel really lucky I've managed to come through everything that's happened the best I can, and I'm still stumbling, living my dreams, and considering what the next will be. But I'm just really hopeful about this for people, and maybe even for myself one day, if I still am within the system, if self-direction comes in, that would be very helpful in being able to create that which I understand will help for me as a mode of getting well. And not just getting well, but becoming a whole person and experiencing wholeness. And they said it's based on people's strengths, preferences, goals, and it's a creative and flexible plan. And they said people have an individual budget, using some of the money towards traditional services, allowing a person significant creativity in their life goals and how to reach them. So diverting some of the money that would go to traditional services and treatments to creating one's own plan and goals, and purchasing services and things that will help one move towards a goal that a person has self-identified. And to me, that's just brilliant. I didn't even hear a single word in this webinar that I didn't like. And even if they said recovery, when they're talking about all this other stuff, that makes sense to me, because recovery as one would want to live sounds like recovering a life that one would want to live. But recovery in terms of just take these drugs and go to this place and go to this group, and that's the recovery that you get, is not good enough. And that makes that recovery word sound awful, because that's what the recovery is. It's what people have designed and selected for a person, and that's not it. So it's the same word, but used in a completely different systemic framework. It has completely different meaning. And in terms of the brokerage support, a lot of times they are training peers to do that job. And I could imagine myself as some kind of brokerage supporter, helping people to really reach their dreams and goals. So perhaps this next while I can think about what my dreams and goals are, and almost create a self-directed plan, almost pretending that I would get funding, but I won't, but to almost experiment with what they're talking about, knowing that that will come along one day for people. So maybe people have an idea of what that might look like. Just talking about some of the great things that might be available, and just assume that self-direction will eventually come in, even if it's in 40 years. it's just so amazing to me to imagine that some of the money that one would get for traditional services could be instead used for non-traditional services. And I'll definitely listen to this webinar again. It was just so rich and full of awesomeness. And they even said it's different from a medical model of case management. It's more of a coaching thing. And I've said to people in the mental health field a few times over the years that I feel like I need a coach. I don't need a clinician. I need a coach, someone to really help me move towards a life that is really amazing, because that's what's going to keep me out of hospitals. And if I'm living a good life, then I assume that one's mental health will be better. And they said peers can be support brokers. There's a national resource center for participant-directed services. And they even mentioned hiring and firing the worker of their choice. So if a person has a worker and they don't resonate, they can just fire that worker and find another one. And to me, that's so important, because there's a lot of studies out there that relationships are the number one predictor of whether a so-called treatment will be helpful. If a person has a relationship with their psychiatrist and takes medications, the medications are more effective then. If a person doesn't have a relationship with their psychiatrist and takes no meds. So it's more so the relationship. And I've experienced that so many times where it's really the relationships. So even when I'm talking about all this stuff in the mental health system, I have 99% great relationships in the mental health system, and that has been my number one strength. And they talked about how self-direction represents a culture shift. It's completely different, and they're doing research showing the potential of this model. So that's why I asked myself the question, what does this look like even before it's available? And what I've been doing with this self-dialogue is actually really talking myself through my own self-direction. And even working in mental health, if I was working in mental health in a system where people could self-direct their services and I was supporting that, I could work in that. But working in what it is right now, all of these things that I've talked about through this last journey in the year, they would just be obsolete. My conversation with myself would be obsolete if it was already that way. And can we insist on self-direction? Can we ask for it? It's already happening in other places, so why isn't it starting to happen in Canada? And can we as peers create almost a support network, so when there are support brokers, we already have this structure of services and products and all these different things that can help people. So can we create that so when it comes in, it's easy and we don't end up falling into allowing, say, if a clinician is helping us self-direct, they have a very narrow view on what could be helpful. And of course, it's supposed to be person-directed, so according to their goals, but it's always great to have a knowledge base of what might help a person move towards their goals. And they were saying in the webinar that the state of Michigan already offers the choice to self-direct, but not that many people probably know about that option, or even if they did, who knows if the people supporting that person would know how to do it, or maybe they have to be referred to somebody else to help them self-direct, or I don't know how it works, but some of the background stuff is actually in place so that people can actually begin to self-direct there. And they mentioned New York, and they mentioned some different things in the background that have been changed in favor of moving towards self-direction, but they just haven't really implemented it. So I wonder if I can create a network of people who would be in a self-direction network. So I get kind of excited about this because it's sort of like lifestyle design, and also being able to not just survive after having a mental health label, but start to be able to thrive. And I see this kind of model as really something that could facilitate that. So they mentioned their website, mentalhealthselfdirection.org. And I really feel if there was self-direction, there'd be no need for self-dialogue. I'm talking to myself about all these things that I'm self-directing, and not necessarily the context stuff. That's a little bit different. But even leaving the mental health system and going to California and then coming off meds, I'm self-directing myself, but with no support. And I was talking about that recently, how I'm alone. I have no support, so it's kind of risky. Whereas I'm not doing anything that would be outside the framework of this self-directed model. It's just the model isn't there yet, and I'm doing it ahead of the model. I'm not waiting for the model to catch up. So I wonder if I can do a self-direction study with my own money and my own resources. And really this self-dialogue is an experiment in self-direction. And I didn't know it was going to be like that in the beginning. So if I can do well directing myself without the help of anyone and do pretty well, what could people do when they actually have support in directing themselves instead of just following orders? They even mentioned some people use self-directed funds to start a business. And to me that's amazing, because I kind of want to start a business, but there's no self-directed funds. And I wonder if I could be a self-direction coach of some kind. And if self-direction works so well, can we do some form of self-direction and coach and support each other before the model actually comes in? Can we be more versed in self-direction as peers before we're even told about it by the mental health system? And can we put pressure to actually start implementing this kind of model before it is actually available? And they even mentioned people voting with their feet, leaving certain services if they don't want to stay in it, and some providers might feel kind of threatened by that. And they should. If the services suck and other things help more, then people can vote with their feet. And then I stopped taking notes on the webinar because it was just really amazing and really hopeful, and not necessarily that hopeful for me, because it could be 20 years before it's actually even beginning to be implemented. I would hope that it would be beginning to be implemented within a couple years and really firmly implemented in 20 years, or hopefully less. But that will kind of put me past it in a lot of ways. So what I'm saying is, since there is a spark of the system possibly moving towards something like that, that's sort of what I'm already doing, but without the system's help. I'm going against what the system would tell me to say, but in this new system, the system wouldn't tell me what to do. They would support me in doing what I feel is best for me, and being a creative agent in doing that, and also it being a fluid thing. So if I think one thing helps me this year, and I want to try something else next year, well then I can. And that to me is really amazing. So I feel hopeful. I feel kind of like I can relax and just live my life, because things are going in the right direction. So as much as I've said negative things about things I've experienced, I'm hoping nobody will have to even think about that happening to them in the next 20 years. And the thing that messes with me too, though, is the way society's designed, it guarantees that a certain number of people will get labeled with a mental health diagnosis. And imagine if we actually invested the money that people might get through the mental health services now, or even through self-directed services, and invest that in a child that's born, for them to self-direct their life, self-direct their education, self-direct everything, and actually move towards their dreams to begin with, instead of moving in the field of what we have created as, this is what success is, this is what you should do in your life, this is what you shouldn't do. You go to school, you go to more school, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, you have a house, and so many people are following this cookie cutter approach and then feeling like, wow, I'm not living the life that I wanted. I'm this and I wanted to be that when I was young, and I knew it, and I didn't do it because my parents put pressure on me to do this, and then I cracked, and then I got a mental health diagnosis. Well, it's still, to me, investing in the problem that is created by the structure of society, and getting self-directed funding is almost a consolation prize for the failure of society's design to be diverse enough and rich enough to really facilitate the discovery of what each person is here to do in their heart, not just according to goals and status and all these things that don't matter when we're on our deathbed. So that's my one thing about the self-directed thing, even though I think it's 99.999% positive. And I still think that people will be treated poorly in the psych ward and drugged, and then have a harder recovery period, even if they get self-directed funding, because they're going to have to use a lot of the funding to actually undo the damage of the way one is received, traumatized, treated, and paternalized, and given this completely non-self-directed care, and slap with a label, and then said, oh, you're out in the community now you can self-direct your recovery and your treatment and your goals, now that we've labeled you and given you a rough ride and made it harder to actually recover. And maybe if a person's been in the hospital for a month on medication, maybe they're addicted to the medication, it's going to be very hard to come off. So with what I was talking about before, being on medication for more than a few weeks can make it nearly guaranteed that one will think they need it for the rest of their life, because the coming off process can be harder than what was happening before one goes on. So in that way, as long as the acute care remains the same, one's trajectory of recovery will still be warped and very limited because of the way that we're indoctrinated and put on these chemical drugs, and it's difficult to get off of them. So that would really require changes to the mental health acts and how one can be given forced and coercive treatment in the acute facility, and then again the self-directed care after is almost a consolation prize for that kind of justified, medically justified, apparently, supposedly, abuse. So it's still a step in the right direction, but we'll see if that ever changes emergency care, and maybe people knowing their rights to self-direction in the community might start asking for some kind of self-direction in the acute ward. Because if somebody knows what's best for them in the community, why is it that somebody doesn't know what's best for them when they're in a crisis? And maybe they don't know exactly what's best, but they might know what they don't want, and say that. And if it's not listened to, like I wasn't listened to a year ago, I was put on Seroquel, high dose, and I said, I don't want that, and I wasn't listened to, and I didn't have a choice. So now I would never go back there unless I'm dragged there in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, so that webinar was really exciting. I'm really excited because people are going to get labels for a long period of time still. And if one can have self-directed funding, that would make the process a lot better. And then hopefully one day there can be some kind of preventative element introduced, in that one knows as a child to move towards one's dreams, and one knows as a parent not to push a child to anything other than their dreams, even if it changes from day to day. It's really important to have self-direction in life from day one, and how can we really do that for one another? Can we be that creative? Can we be that fluid? And maybe that's what I can talk about more with myself too, is some of the things that led me to the point of getting a diagnosis, and how I might have prevented that. And yeah, so I can see from this webinar, and it's good timing, and it addresses a lot of things that I was talking to myself about. And I really see the need for self-direction, because this last year I've really actually gone completely self-directed, and here I am in California, so I'm doing really well. And if I would have taken the advice of that psychiatrist and just stayed on 800 milligrams of Seroquel a day or whatever it was, I would just be a zombie. And that would be the opposite of self-direction. That would be taking the direction of the psychiatrist and then probably gaining weight, vegetating, having flat affect, akathisia. It would have been just such hell. And even being put on that amount or nearly that amount for a few days put me so many steps backwards in my recovery process that I had to go self-directed. And the self-dialogue has been a conversation with myself about the self-direction. And even it's self-directed that I wanted to just talk to myself, because there are no clinicians or therapists, or I can't afford a therapist to talk to every day. So if I had self-directed care, maybe I would have someone else to talk to once a week or something. And I would be able to talk about my self-direction, not about following the directions of my psychiatrist and how my life is going based upon that. So this is really important, the self-direction thing. And I like that I'm already doing that and showing how important it is. And I like when I find out that something I've been doing in self-dialogue is important, and I find out why after the fact, or I'm able to put it in a new context by just learning about the self-direction. I'm able to see what I'm doing is self-direction, and that it is helpful. And self-dialogue is self-direction, and it's also necessary because there is no self-directed funding for things like talking to supportive people or having different supportive services. And I've done so many things over the years that could have been part of self-directed care, and maybe that's something I could talk about too. Whether it's being on a completely raw vegan diet for a while, or taking the Hardy nutritional supplements like I am now, or doing a 10 series of Rolfing, which is a type of massage that helps with structural integration. So if the body's more in alignment, it's using energy properly, it's not wasting energy, it's not slouching and getting sort of contorted over time. And to me, that's important to have alignment. And it also feels good, and it feels good to be aligned. And it fixed my shoulder. I couldn't reach back behind my back and touch both hands on both sides, but after one session of Rolfing, I could do it. So it really fixed something that was off. I've gone to see naturopaths. I've gone for colon hydrotherapy. I've done so many things, and a lot of these things increased my self-esteem because I was able to get rid of my gut that stuck out, and people kept asking me if I was pregnant, or different supplement regimes I was on over time, and just a lot of different things. So that's something I could do, is go through and talk about things that I've done for myself in a self-directed way and funded it myself. I bought an earthing sheet, which is something you can plug into the wall. I bought an earthing mat, so it helps keep you grounded and connected to the earth when on the computer or sleeping. I've done so many things for myself that would be considered self-direction that increase my quality of life, and a lot of those things could be reasons why I'm at this point and able to speak about everything that I've done. So yeah, I'll talk more about this, and I'm really glad I watched that webinar, and there's this new energy behind what I'm doing, and maybe I can move into some positive things, like actually just sharing more of what I did for the 5 years before I started talking to myself, because there was a lot of good stuff. And the thing that really bugged me and got me talking to myself was that all of that was nearly taken away from me by one psychiatrist in a hospital. And all of that self-direction I did on my own dime, working and different things that I did over the years, was almost taken away by one paternalistic psychiatrist trying to drug me up on Seroquel, which is not part of my plan for myself. So that plan of that psychiatrist almost ruined all my plans, all the time, energy, effort, sweat, work, money I put into all my self-direction by myself, for myself, was almost ruined. So that's what spurred this conversation. And a lot of it spurred the conversation in terms of re-languaging and recontextualizing the experiences. So if anything came back, I would have that context to fall back on instead of falling back into the trap of a kind of doctor like I had in the psych ward last April. And not all doctors are like that. I had one before that in the same psych ward twice who gave me a bit of extra meds for a week and sent me on my way. And that was very helpful and it was amazing. But then when I went back to the hospital that third time and expected the same sort of thing, different doctor, completely different result. So I knew better because of the times I'd been in there before and how I was able to get back on my feet very quickly. And I won't accept anything but that. And so now I'm just doing things on my own in the way that I want. And that's why I've spent a year talking to myself about all this different contexts and ways of seeing these altered states. So yeah, that's a lot of words, but I'm seeing that now in this next year, I want to move towards some kind of altruism, but maybe also talk more about the things that I did in the 5 good years. Now that I'm off meds, now that I feel a bit more safe in the stability of my consciousness, because that's important right now while I'm in California, I can talk about some of these positive things and positive things I did for myself. And maybe that's part of the altruism, and it would be good to just imagine that one day things will be self-directed and that context creation will be helpful, but also knowing things that one can do for oneself to self-direct. And maybe that's something I can do in the next year too, is just work towards getting the word out about self-direction to some people in the different health authorities, get that word out there and at least get people thinking about it. And maybe acting like that will just be how it is. Maybe helping people self-direct now. If somebody wants to come off meds and that is a self-directed thing they want to do, help to find people supports to be able to do that before having to wait 20 years to come off a medication that is going to destroy one of our organs. So for some of us, we can't wait for self-direction to actually come in terms of self-directed funding. But can we demand self-direction now in things that we're not necessarily going to get funding for? Like we won't necessarily get funding for hearty nutritional supplements. But if we really value that and are able to get some money from our parents or work a little bit of a job to pay for it, or we have some savings, or we have something or other, being able to self-direct that choice. So yeah, this self-dialogue has really been an experiment in self-direction, not just in terms of doing what I want to do in terms of so-called recovery goals, because my life has actually been less about that in the last year than it was in the years prior, because in the years prior I was working more and I was actually able to use a lot of my money to purchase things that were part of my goals, whether it was supplements or different types of things like naturopaths and stuff. But in the last year, since that bad psych ward experience, I tried to quit peer support, and I didn't fully quit. I was just doing some work in the background. And then I got a different job, which I talked about at length as a coordinator and of a peer program, and I quit that to go to California because it really didn't resonate with me. And I wrote a resignation letter, and I could read that because probably some of the stuff I talk about is about the lack of self-direction, even if I don't use those words exactly. And so I probably will read that kind of next, because I think I want to get saying the slightly negative things out of the way and move on to something else, move on to this positive building of thriving. And coming to California was my attempt to thrive, and I didn't quite thrive, but I went into a dive of going off my medications. And actually, now that I'm off, I'm actually more equipped to thrive because I don't have all that toxic stuff that I feel isn't good for me running through my body. And so I really want to move more into altruism, attempt to thrive, self-direction, and maybe talking more about self-direction before the funding comes in, and just really getting people's brains thinking in terms of that and how we really can direct our lives, and one day there will actually be the funding to back that up. And that's the thing. I really feel like through moving through this kind of crisis, whether it's labeled mental illness or whatever, one can really move into the life of one's dreams. Because one of the things I talked about was how part of the mental health crisis to me feels like we're so far away from our original trajectory of life that we sort of designed before we were even born. And I never said that, I don't think. And I'm not saying that's how it is, but we have a design in our nervous system of what resonates with us. And each time we move towards something that is not resonating with us, we move further away from our true self, our light body self, our original unwarped trajectory of life. And I feel like the crisis is sort of snapping us back to our original trajectory, and then back to this awful trajectory we're on. And it's like an earthquake between the original trajectory of life, if we were never warped away from what we were meant to be by society, our parents' education, our own decisions that might not have been best for us, but we're acting on information being outside of the wrong situation in life due to the path that we'd walked along, due to all those influencing factors. So it's a vicious circle, but I feel like the crisis can allow us to get back onto the path of who we really are. And if self-directed funding comes in, that can really facilitate that to be true. But in the meantime, we can still move towards self-directing the best that we can. And maybe we can actually start some kind of self-direction thing and support each other. And self-direct, knowing that that kind of thing works, even though we don't necessarily have the support and backup from the system. But can we help each other with that? And maybe just in me talking to myself about these things, in these ways that I have always really been self-directing in most ways, maybe that will help. I don't know. It sounds more positive than creating context and saying a lot of the negative things that I have been for the last year, because the last year has actually been the most negative since that psych ward experience. Before that, I actually didn't really have that much negative stuff to talk about. And so maybe I should share more of that part of my story. So yeah, I really don't know, but I really do feel quite excited about that webinar and the implications of that. And even just having that give a little bit of context to maybe what I want to do with this dialogue, as well as with myself, and in helping people moving forward if I can be of service in any way. But also, upping my own self-direction and moving into thriving for real. And if I can move into thriving for real and then share this, it could really show something, because right now I'm still not quite into thriving. I would like to start a peer-run business, some kind of social enterprise, thrive, create myself as a healthy being, physically, mentally, spiritually, and I'm fortunate that I have been able to do that so far, and I have been able to learn so much. So I wouldn't change a single thing that I went through that was bad, especially the last 2 years. I was in the hospital 3 times. One of them was a complete disaster. I experienced a lot of seeing things that were happening in the system, subtle things that were re-traumatizing and really bothering me that were happening to other people, and seeing that same psychiatrist treating somebody else that I know and how terrible they're doing, and there's just a trend there, and it's just really painful to witness. And even being away from home right now, feeling like I have this time to heal, but if I don't go back and actually make use of that healing in terms of still being able to share the stuff that was hard, and make use of that, and share the wisdom in that, then the healing is for nothing, because my personal healing just for me doesn't really mean that much. I'm just one person. I'm just a person that won't be here forever. And what's important is to support each other and form relationships and support each other in these different ways. And yeah, I gotta go, but I'll talk to myself more about this later. I feel like now I have a lot to talk about. I feel like I have a lot to talk about with myself after yesterday's dialogue with myself. And yesterday's dialogue was mainly spurred on by watching that webinar on self-directed funding. And I felt really excited about it. And I still do, but I've realized that getting excited about self-directed funding is something that is outside of my circle of influence. I read the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People a number of years ago. It's by Stephen Covey, I think. And I remember him talking about one circle of concern and one circle of influence. So the self-directed funding is within my circle of concern, but it's not something I can directly influence, besides maybe letting people know about it a bit or sending a few emails to certain people, but it's not really going to do that much. That is more the system that has to take that on. And I also was saying that I've sort of been doing a self-directed thing without having self-directed funding. So I don't want to start framing my dialogue with myself in terms of self-direction. I've been calling it self-dialogue and embody one's mania, which could be the same in a way, partially as self-direction or have similar elements. So I'm going to continue to use my own language and maybe throw self-direction in there, here and there. I really don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm just telling myself now that don't get too excited about the system's languaging of things, because it's just outside my direct influence. What I can influence is my dialogue with myself and what I talk about moving forward, and also what I choose to embody. And I've talked a lot about embodiment, yet I guess I've embodied certain things. I've embodied somebody coming off their meds, and I haven't really embodied that which I would embody as a person who is no longer on meds, who's gone through all of this stuff in the system. And now I'm somewhat free. And I remember talking about how after my crisis in January, and I was able to manage it at home without going to the hospital, by taking extra Seroquel and things, I felt kind of free. I felt free to not always be near a hospital in my hometown, in my home country. And that gave me the confidence to go to California, knowing that I could control that situation or do something about that situation if it happened. And it did happen. And then I took extra Seroquel, and then that spurred me on to deciding to come off meds now as opposed to when I go back home, because I didn't see giving myself extra drugs all the time as an option. I saw it as, okay, these drugs aren't working anymore, it's time to try something else. And I took that risk. So I didn't think that I would have a chance to be a person off medication until after I was home for, say, 2 or 3 months. But this means I'm months ahead of schedule. So I've been wanting to embody a person who is not needing to take toxic drugs, and I'm actually doing that. So then what comes out of that? And I don't really know. And so this talking about it isn't to say I know what it's going to be. It's just talking about possibilities. And also I'm feeling like perhaps I will talk for the next 10 days about stuff related to this self-direction and read some stuff that I wrote to mental health systems and things. And then perhaps try to let it go by the 20th of June, which is my 1-year anniversary of the initial 1-year mark I set for myself. And that is actually the beginning of the playlist that I've put together. So, because that was actually the first videos that I actually edited. I was talking and then I would edit it. So before that I made a few videos and I didn't edit them, I just talked the whole way through. So it's kind of arbitrary, but I'm seeing that June 20th as a possible opportunity to shift the conversation with myself. And it's already been shifting anyways, but whatever. I've often set little timelines for myself and not followed them. And that goes both ways. I've set the timeline of going off meds when I get home, and I've already gone off the meds. So even if I don't stop talking about mental health stuff by the 20th, and not completely, just focusing on some of these things that I have no control over, but I still want to talk about. But can I shift more into things I do have control over, like what I would embody next, as well as creating new language around moving away and ensuring that I won't fall back into the mental health system, as well as language that is just completely devoid of referring to mental health at all. And perhaps one day I will reside in that languaging and in that sort of interpretation, even though life isn't an interpretation, but using words is an interpretation of that. So will I interpret that energy without having to refer to mental health because I'm not having any of those kinds of experiences? And maybe I am, but maybe I just have a completely different language. And the language we use around certain energies and experiences actually frames how we experience them. So if I do have further experience and I'm able to create language even further away from mental health, and I say further away from mental health, but what I really mean is into something else completely, because even saying further away from mental health is still a reaction to the mental health system. And it might take a little while to get that out of my system, and that's okay. So even talking to myself now, I'm kind of reframing and seeing those energies that are still holding on to this dialogue. And I talked about before how in my early 20s I had chronic fatigue syndrome, and that's all I'd think about, and that's all I'd talk about, and that's what I would talk about with other people if they're asking what was going on for me, and sharing my journey with that. And then eventually I might talk about it once a year. So how long will it take for me to talk about mental health once a year? And maybe if I continue to participate in change in that dimension, I will continue to talk about it more. But maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And that's the other thing I was thinking is, in my last conversation with myself, I was talking kind of like I want to go back and get into participating in system change in some way. but I'm wondering if I even dip my toe in it, even look at it, or even contemplate going back to it. Can dipping my toe in the mental health system, not even in terms of wanting to participate in it, but just participate in facilitating change, will I drown? And will that maybe lead me to a path of having to participate in it again? And I've had experiences in the past that have told me to really just move away from it and stay away. But it's difficult because I do want to help in some way. I've had some really positive experiences and I've been really lucky to come this far, and I'm hoping to go much further. But will going back to help in some way prevent the possibilities of going further? And would it be more beneficial and valuable to go further and then look back, or go further and never look back? Or in going further, might I be able to meet other beings who see things in these ways and reaffirm the dialogue I've had with myself and I'm moving towards? Maybe one day I will just be talking in spiritual circles and the whole mental health journey element of it will be just a small thing, and maybe speaking from that vantage point is more valuable. I really don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about possibilities. I'm talking about things I know nothing about. I'm talking about the unfoldment of something, and I don't know what that's going to look like. But again, I have to remind myself to be with what I actually can influence. And my main thing with my self-dialogue is I really can only influence myself. And that's why I'm talking to myself in the way that I would like to, and not assuming that anyone else would like to talk in this way. Because I've had those experiences where people are talking and they sort of assume that another person's interested, and they just go on and they speak in such a way that almost is telling the person, okay, wait, I have something really long to say, and the way I'm breathing and the way I'm speaking shows that it's going to be a certain length, and I'm just assuming you want to listen to this. When I find usually when I speak to people now, I just give short snippets because I never assume somebody wants to actually hear what I want to say. And I wonder sometimes what makes people say things that they say, and where does it come from, and why do people think they're interested, that other person's interested. So me talking to myself is, I'm never assuming anybody else is ever going to be interested in any of this. And if someone is, and they come across it in some way, then great. But if not, and someone can just turn it off, or they never come across it, whatever, it doesn't matter. So I'm interested in this conversation with myself, and that's why it's gone on so long. And I have a lot to say, and this actually removes that thing where I feel like I have stuff to say, but other people might not be interested in listening. And it's probably, and it could be a common feeling amongst people who have been labeled with stuff, having a lot to say, but nobody to say it to, because it's sort of outside the circle of what people are concerned about or interested in society, because a lot of it is about entertainment or what's on TV or blah, blah, blah. It's not something that is in this unknown dimension and really exploring and unfolding the unknown. And I was wondering if that's one of the reasons why I'm having a harder time conversing with people, because what I want to talk about is just not really part of what comes up naturally. So it's not like, oh, I can add to that. So if I was somebody who watched a lot of TV and someone started talking about TV, I could add to that. But people don't really bring up the things that I have in my heart and mind. And some of the things are things I might talk about with a therapist, but I can't afford daily therapy, and I probably wouldn't want to. So this process of self-dialogue, again, is kind of a little bit like something I've chosen as part of self-direction. And like I said, I've been really self-directing for the last year, and And now that I'm off medication, I don't remember if I said that it's like this other level besides being free from feeling like I need to be near a hospital that I can go to at home in my country where it's provided by healthcare, because I feel like if something happens I can manage. I feel a new freedom now that I'm not taking the meds, because with meds I need a prescription. So I need to go see a doctor at least every month or 2 or 3 in order to get a prescription. So in that way I'm sort of tethered to that. With the Hardy Nutritionals, I can order that to anywhere in the world. So now it's no longer going to a doctor and getting lithium blood tests and getting a prescription for lithium and then going to pick it up at the pharmacy. That's kind of degrading in a way, and now I don't have to participate with that, at least for the time being. I'm never saying that this is going to go on forever, though I would like to talk about it like that's a possibility. So yeah, another level of freedom, feeling like maybe I never have to go back to a psychiatrist. Yes, I would rather pay for micronutrients than get free pharmaceuticals because I live in poverty, so I qualified for them being paid for. So to continue with this self-direction that I've been doing without the funding, and I don't need the funding for self-direction, I can direct myself without having the funding. And so really, for me, self-direction is embodying my mania, or moving towards that which I truly would like. And I already done that in terms of going to California, stopping medication, at least for now. So really this next phase is unknown in going back home. And after the June 20th anniversary, I kind of would like to consider this embodiment more, and what I need to embody to really be very solid and unaffected when I go back home. Unaffected by how people might perceive me if I tell them I went off meds, or if I don't tell them I went off meds. Or how do I need to be so the question never even comes up? Can I orient my energy in such a way that the question never comes up? I don't know. These are all things that I'm really wondering about. And the other thing is, self-direction is more about goals and external things in a way. Like, I want a yoga pass. I want a better place to live so it's not scary. And I want to get a job. Or I want vitamins or something. And these are sort of external things. But embodying one's mania is more the internal orientation of energy and what kind of action that produces. Because in mania, the orientation of energy, the flow of energy changes, and our actions and how we are in the world changes, and for a certain period of time at least, we feel in a very rich dimension of existence. And if we felt connected with that rich dimension of existence, then what we might actually have as goals and values and things that we want externally might change. Our needs might change drastically. So we could go about it by doing external things and having goals and wanting certain items to make our life better through this self-directed funding, if it ever comes into play, or even without the funding, and finding creative ways to be able to do those things and achieve those external goals. But really the goal, if there is one, in embodying one's mania is that internal orientation of energy that makes each moment so rich it doesn't really matter what's there. It's really moving and flowing with the moment. So I'm seeing now, talking to myself, that self-direction is sort of a bit more external, though not totally, because one can go to a certain education program and learn certain skills that changes the inner orientation of energy, say taking improv or different things that will change that energy of action and behavior, and improve what they call self-esteem and confidence and all those things. That those are concepts that sort of disappear when one is connected with that embodied mania state. And I'm not talking about being completely manic and out of control, but to me I feel like we can master those energies and be in touch with that energy without actually being out of control, and actually moving and sharing those energies and acting in ways that those energies create us to act, because there's some kind of possibility and alignment there. There's some kind of intelligence there that if we can really observe it and witness it, we may be able to master. And I had a conversation with somebody yesterday and they actually used the word mastery. So again, it could be mastering one's mania as well as embodying one's mania. That could be the same thing. So yeah, the embodiment is more about acting in a certain way, acting in these altruistic ways, and being in connection with these other values that come in to operation. And when that happens, one feels like one can do anything and accomplish anything. And so that would make the self-direction, if there was any, a lot easier. And it could be important for them to be somewhat congruent with those energies, instead of using self-directed funding to move a person back to how they were before, when this energy is trying to create some kind of mutation or transformation or metamorphosis or change in us. So what I'm saying is still harvesting one's mania and really considering that before wondering what one's goals might be. Because what one's goals were before all the process and distress and crisis happen could actually be very different after the fact. And so considering that contrast is important, and considering goals not to really get one to the pre-mania state, but to some kind of post-mania transformation, and actually riding the waves of some of those energies, because for a lot of us those energies are going to come back. So learning to ride the waves of them and master them could be very beneficial, and could actually be part of what is trying to move us towards creating the life that we really want. So having goals in alignment with that. And by having a goal of going to California, I didn't know that I would have to master some energies and ride the waves of certain energies, which would lead me to see that I need to come off medication now. So by living my dream, I got to live another dream, which is coming off medication. So that's the power of following one's dreams. And I even said that the universe could have created that energetic earthquake in my consciousness to make me really see, okay, I have to come off my meds now, because I was in a place where I could do it. So things seem to fall in alignment. So yeah, embodied mania, getting in alignment with synchronicity and moving towards synergy, because there's signs, which are just sort of little coincidences. Then there's synchronicity, which actually require action, not just noticing, oh, that was kind of interesting, but action. And then synergy, I feel, is when more than one person is involved and really moving together and sharing that. So my real goal is to continue this language creation and recontextualizing and seeing how just talking with myself unfolds things that want to unfold. And even having this dialogue with myself, I never planned to really keep doing it per se, but it just kept going. So there's some kind of alignment there. And I even feel things that I've written, I just want to really translate most things into video right now, because I feel that is what is most in alignment, and putting energy into having a dialogue with myself first, and maybe going back and talking about a lot of things that I researched before, because there's a lot of good information, but I just find it easier to just talk to myself about, because it's more fluid than trying to put together some kind of coherent writing. Writing has to be a lot more concise, coherent, in a certain order and logical, whereas conversation is just conversation. And my brain does not work on putting things in logical order. By the time I have one point and the next point, I don't even remember what I wrote for the first point. My brain literally cannot do it. And I wonder if self-direction could demand respite, because there's this law that was passed in the States saying that a person has to be in the least invasive treatment facility or something available. So if somebody can be in the community and they're locked up in an institution, they have to be in the community. So the community has to provide space for that person. So in the same way, if there's respite as a model and it's less invasive than the hospital and it actually works, then that should be available too. It should be the least invasive treatment too, even in acute care. Not just when one is already drugged up and somewhat consistent from that, and then put them in a community. Well, it should be least invasive too in acute. So I wrote a bunch of stuff down. Self-dialogue is talking about self-direction without support. And maybe one day we can include the system in our conversation. So I'm sure so many of us have already been self-directing in so many ways, just using our own money or doing things that are free. And the system only supports this small little chunk, which is take your drugs, take your little bit of rec therapy, this program, that's it. So really the system is asking to be involved in our whole life planning. And what makes them think they really deserve to know that kind of stuff? And what makes them think that we're going to be all of a sudden so happy to really collaborate in that way? I guess part of it is the fact that we would get some money. Otherwise, why would we even talk to them? We already don't talk about that stuff because they can't really facilitate that anyway. So what I'm saying is, self-dialogue is a way to be the broker of oneself, to be the therapist of oneself. In the last year, I've been my own clinician, I've been my own pharmacist, I've been my own psychiatrist, I've been my own hospital. Yeah, I've been my own pharmacist, splitting my pills in half, tapering myself off. I've been my own psychiatrist. I've been everything for myself. And I wonder if we can create a self-directed mental health peer network. So a network of people that are peer approved, so we don't end up getting directed into things that are not lived experience approved. Screw this evidence-based crap. If you take the evidence-based stuff out there, it's probably 1% or less. And all of these things that we would design for ourselves in self-direction aren't necessarily evidence-based for mental health treatment. But now all of a sudden we would be getting funding for those things. So what I'm saying is, if we have some kind of clinical team involved in our planning, they can still skew us towards using services that, if we had a better depth of understanding of what's really out there and we were sharing with each other and having it lived experience approved instead of evidence-based practice, then that would be a lot more rich and helpful for all of us. So perhaps we can do that. Maybe we can even create a Go Fund My Self-Direction site. But it would be good to call it something else. But it could be good to call it self-direction, because if that term becomes more popular within the mental health framework, so it's being Googled and researched, that way when peers hear about it and they Google it, maybe there'll be just as much information put together by peers and people with lived experience than the system, because that could still be designed in kind of a coercive way. So self-direction is about creating our own life and perhaps not using their language. And can we share with each other how we self-direct before the self-directed funding comes in? And I'm wondering if anyone wants to join me in this dialogue. I've heard of peer open dialogue in terms of helping people who might be in altered states of consciousness. But what about having open dialogue about thriving, about really changing our lives and moving with some of these energies, and not just about when things are bad we have dialogue, but can we dialogue and create new context and language like I've been doing with myself, and maybe all of this dialogue with myself will invite that, and it doesn't really matter what I said to myself at all. What matters is inviting a new type of conversation, a new way of seeing ourselves and seeing this process that we go through. And a better word for self-direction instead of self-direction could be self-creation. So direction sounds like, okay, I want to do this, and so I'm really going to focus on that. Whereas creation is more this unfolding, ongoing creative process, and each unfoldment, each small step informs the next. So that's the one thing that's kind of lame about goal setting, is that the goal of goal setting is to achieve one's goals. When if one's just creating and designing one's life moment by moment, there's no, oh, you didn't reach your goal. Because if we have our eyes too focused on goals, we're going to miss out on other information that is coming to us. And that could be happening in regular state of consciousness. Everyone has their goals and their desires and their pleasures and what they're really looking for. And what they really would resonate with is actually all around, but it can't be seen because of goals and because of focus. It's actually a space of loosening up one's focus and sort of blurring one's eyes and allowing the focal vision to really take a rest, and not having these goals as words coming out of one's eyes and chopping up reality, but just really taking reality in and seeing what it's bringing to us. And I made a note about that somewhere, but I don't know where it is yet. And another point is with this is that altered states can be temporary and transient, and they don't necessarily require daily medications, but we've been hypnotized into thinking we do. But if we can be our own modulator of our consciousness, decide when we need to take what and when we don't need to take anything, and maybe take nothing most of the time, but if crap hits the fan, then we take something, but not take everything thinking that we really have to poison our consciousness daily in order to function in the world, because it's not necessarily true. And as we become more confident with some of these things and really learn about these energies, we know when we need to do something to bring them back, and we know when we don't need to do anything. And so it's even about self-creating or self-directing one's own consciousness. So there's the goals we can do outside and get funding for, but no amount of funding is really going to teach us how to understand our own consciousness. And that's something we have to do for ourselves. And some of these medications can be ways of modulating that, but we don't need to down-regulate our whole experience every single day. That's going to actually prevent the learning. And I think one time I talked to myself about the Recovery Declaration of Canada, and how one of the points was related to having people with lived experience involved in every level of service, delivering services, service design, blah, blah, blah. But I think with this self-direction point coming in, it actually needs to be hugely revised to say, not just in service delivery, but in directing one's own recovery and life, and having funding and support in order to move through all dimensions of life, not just through the system. So having peers involved in creating some kind of map of what we really can explore outside this very small piece of the pie of the services in the mental health system. So that's the thing. Recovery right now is recovery through the mental health system and the services they provide. But if self-directed funding came in, that would expand it to something so vast. And peers would be involved in that. So it's really something huge instead of this tiny little having peers involved in service delivery. And so that's really what I'm doing with myself, is talking about all those other dimensions. Though I haven't talked that much about it. It's been more about moving outside, having to participate in the system at all. And that's kind of what I would prefer to work on anyway, is helping people move outside the system completely. But if it was actually a really good system, then maybe people wouldn't want to. So I talk a lot about moving outside the system, but if it really was completely self-directed, from everything to whether or not someone takes medication, to exactly what the amount one would get if one is slapped with a label, it can go to anything one feels that one would need to regain a quality of life that at some point becomes a self-sustaining positive feedback loop. And that's what thriving is. It's being in this self-sustaining positive feedback loop, which with the way the current system is designed, it's very difficult to make that happen. And I'm somewhat making that happen for myself, but by moving away from what the system offers and what the system would tell me to do. And maybe one day the system won't tell anyone what to do, and one can really design their own path to a positive feedback, thriving loop. And maybe it would be a certain way in the beginning, like needing basic needs, and they talked about that in the webinar. People with the funding initially meet basic needs, but eventually, as a person gains confidence and skills and energy, that energy and all of that good stuff inside can actually be utilized in order to further use the funding in more expansive ways. So yeah, the Recovery Declaration should really say something about we have the right to say exactly what that process looks for us and change it and be creative in the process and have it be fluid and have the funding and support to back that up. And it's not just taking the money and saying thank you. It's actually, if we're able to move into a place of being where we are happy and fulfilled, that has implications for all areas of society and saves money for society in every area, not just mental health spending. So, and they talked about that in the webinar too, and they haven't done any studies particularly on that yet, but it's pretty obvious in what they've discovered so far. I can see that with self-directed funding, people might really be able to transcend the mental health system for real, even if it is a good one with self-direction. I have a lot more to talk about with myself. I have some notes in my computer. I have those things I want to read. Other things I want to talk to you about. Some of my past experience that point to why I never dreamed it had anything to do with mental health issues. And they're kind of cool things, and I'll probably touch on them as I go. It would be cool to revisit them and actually just frame them in the way that I felt that they were at the time, without referencing anything to do with mental health. And soon I won't even have to say without referencing anything to do with mental health. So I'm pretty excited about certain things just falling out of this dialogue and not taking up any more of my energy in it arising and being given voice to through my voice, and then listening to myself saying it later and blah 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 blah. So could be kind of cool. Yesterday I watched a video by Jason Silva because it was sent to my email, and it's called Ourselves as Our Biggest Threat. And he begins by saying that 800,000 people a year commit suicide. And unfortunately, saying commit suicide is old languaging based on back in the day when ending one's life was actually a crime. So it was committing a crime. So that's why it was said that somebody would commit suicide. But now I think the languaging has been upgraded to died by suicide or something like that. Things like that. But at the same time, maybe saying commit suicide gives a greater effect, and that's what people are used to hearing, so whatever. I don't know why he chose to say commit suicide, but I sometimes say it too. I sometimes slip it out. But then I usually correct myself because it's not a crime anymore. And it's kind of strange that it would be a crime, because who are they going to punish? Though it was probably for more like deterrence and insurance policy purposes and things like that. But anyways, I don't know what I'm talking about. But then he also said, it's astonishing that that many people a year by active volition would end their life or something like that. And I know from my experience that I've nearly gone through with ending my life a couple of times, but I've never wanted to. It was more feeling like there was something that took me over. And there was this element of me watching my body make a beeline for something to end my life. And it was very scary to actually just watch it happen, not actually do it myself. So I think to say that 800,000 people a year volitionally do it is probably a bit of a misunderstanding, because I think there's almost this program that can take us over sometimes and make us do it while this element that really doesn't want it to happen watches it happen. And I don't know if that's true. We can't really ask people, but I've been in that scenario a few times where it took all my effort to tilt myself in enough of the direction to not do it. And that's why I have the Zap strap that I always keep in my purse, so I know I can. It's almost like a tug of war to get to safety before that element actually does something, and could be some kind of horrific scene of hanging, or that's the one I'm afraid of the most, actually. So it's getting myself to safety and strapping my wrist to something firm instead of ending up hanging myself or something like that. So I don't feel I would ever do it by volition. And whatever volition I have left has always managed to keep me safe from that force of gravity. It's almost like a force. It's like if you're falling out of a window. If you fall out of a window, you don't have a choice. It's over if it's high enough. So it's kind of like just really stepping back from that ledge when something is pulling you to jump. And it's not wanting to. So who knows how many people experience it that way. It's more like feeling like one is programmed to do it at some point. Yeah, I don't know what I'm talking about, but yeah, I know for me, I have lots of plans to not do it, and I don't want to do it, but I also know there's this weird thing that comes in sometimes and almost pulls me towards doing it, and I fear that. It's not that I want to. So, yeah. And he even mentioned a statement, our hunger for meaning. And a lot of what I've talked about with myself is this meaning-making process. And again, not saying it has meaning ultimately, but it has meaning subjectively. And I think that by creating meaning with oneself, that meaning is almost the anti-gravity. It's almost the levity that keeps me, or a person maybe, from that vortex of gravity that can pull one down into those lower levels of consciousness that could result in that happening. And the lowest level of consciousness, according to Dr. David Hawkins, is shame. And so when a person is in the level of consciousness of shame, one has a higher likelihood of acting out certain behaviors that could cause one to end one's life. Whereas if we're in consciousness of love and oneness and those higher levels of consciousness on the scale of consciousness, then we are not a threat to our own physicality in the same way. So I feel meaning making is super important, even if it's meaningless to other people. And even if it's meaningless 5 minutes after we make that kind of meaning, I feel it's really the anti-gravity. And I did a few videos in January where I was talking about shame, but I didn't really fully get into it. And I know there will be a time that I want to get into it, but it's just not now, perhaps because of the fragility of really going into that at this moment. So it's in the back of my mind. It's not something I'm fully ignoring, but I still feel like I need to keep myself ahead of this gravity that could cause me to go into shame quite quickly, and maybe one day end my life, and that could happen. So wanting to create as much meaning and dialogue with myself while I still can. And maybe there will be a time when I can't. And maybe making this meaning keeps me ahead of any of those kind of times where I can't. And I do feel that it's important to have the universe on my side, and I feel like I do at the moment, but I also feel like there's a lot of dark forces and things that could easily pull me back into a place where I really feel that the universe isn't on my side, and maybe I don't even belong in the universe anymore. So for now, I'm having fun, and I do also believe, and I don't know if it's a belief, but it could have been a belief before, in sort of having to make up for a lot of bad karma in past lives, in my current life, and it just seems like that's something that I've been a part of, and so wanting to make up for that, wanting to make more value than I seem to have subtracted from my life and from the collective in ways, and I think I'll know when I'm ready to look at that more, and the universe will probably tell me. And he said a quote by Tolstoy that man's inability to live without a way to bridge the finite with the infinite is severely under threat. And what I saw from that quote was, I feel like map consciousness is the bridge between the finite and the infinite. And it's actually a state of walking on that bridge and walking between the worlds and in both worlds at the same time. And it's quite challenging and rich and beautiful. So I feel like we're actually labeling and pathologizing this bridging state. And it could be a really meaningful state, especially if it was framed in a different way and supported in a different way and received in a different way. Because a person walking in both worlds actually needs some support, and it's a vulnerable state because the ego isn't so much intact. So when it's not really intact, it's more suspended. When other egos come in and push one towards something like the psych ward, well, that's what's going to happen, and a person might go kicking and screaming, but they don't really have a choice a lot of the time, and then they get stuck in a paradigm that can be helpful, but it can also be quite detrimental. And it can also prevent finding meaning in that bridging state and making meaning from that bridging state in the future. And I had a little example of this the other day. A friend of mine was showing me a painting that they were working on, and they were saying they're experimenting with some color, and I was looking and I didn't really see any color. I saw something that looked white. And then when they said, this is blue, all of a sudden I could see that it was blue. So by saying something is something, it makes it turn more into that. So if we're in a bridging state and people come along and say, oh, this is a mental illness, then it turns more into that. It accentuates the characteristics and makes one more aware of the characteristics of the state that could be categorized as that. Whereas if somebody was saying this is some kind of spiritual awakening and pointed to all the bits of that, then those are the things that would be augmented and made salient and wondered about, and the whole framing of it is a bit more hopeful and interesting instead of completely hopeless. Even though they say, oh, there's hope and recovery and all that, once a person sees that that's what they're being pushed towards, it feels very hopeless. And the concept of hope is introduced because of all that hopelessness. We wouldn't have to think about, oh, there's hope, if we weren't made to feel so hopeless just by being slapped with a label. So it's interesting that this thing that could be a bridge for people is turned into an abyss. And I feel like if that bridge was honored in people that reach that bridging state, that bridge might open up for more people. And when it does open up, they're able to walk that bridge and cross it. But since nobody's able to cross it, we're not able to map out that other territory and bring that map to others and then provide new hopeful context, and then that allows the process to happen easier. Just the same thing when people thought it was humanly impossible to run a 4-minute mile. And then somebody ran it, and it took a long time for that to happen. And then shortly after, so many other people were able to run it because it made it possible. It made people change their beliefs about that and what was possible. So the same thing could be true if some of us are able to cross that bridge and share it, then it opens up that possibility for others. And the more people that cross, and the more people that live in that way of being able to cross the bridge, the more people that can do it. And he says we don't have a connection with something larger than ourselves. Well, that state of map consciousness, we definitely feel connected to something larger than ourselves. Not just through words and faith and belief, but actual experience and actual living reality. And I wrote down to myself, is it experience or is it actually reality? So oftentimes we have some kind of experience and then we remember it, and then we try to re-experience something similar. So we try to move through reality looking for a similar experience that we're holding in our brain from the past. So we're never actually in contact with reality because we're looking for an experience. And Krishnamurti talks about this thing about experience, and I never quite got it, and I don't know if I get it now, but I'm seeing that if one holds an experience that one had in the past and is trying to make that salient, or is moving in reality but only narrowing it down to a past experience and wanting to repeat that, then we're not actually moving in reality. So I feel like this awakening or this in touchness with map consciousness is actually being in touch with reality, not with reality with a superimposed past experience, hoping to be repeated, hoping to have a repeated sensation by recalling that. So I can kind of see that state of map consciousness is reality, and we're never actually in touch with this richness of reality because we're holding on to past experiences. So when that reality touches us, because it's not something we can actually reach for, it's there, but we can't be with it because of our past experiences getting in the way. But when it actually gets in touch with us for some reason, it feels so foreign because it's nothing like we've ever experienced before, and it can't be. So I was sort of seeing that, and I remember there was a excerpt by Krishnamurti saying, there is a reality that when come upon the mind transforms it. You don't have to do a thing. So really saying there's nothing we can do to contact that. And interestingly enough, a lot of people who go into map consciousness don't really do anything in particular. It's a mental illness, but it could just be having this other reality or reality get in touch with us, and it really transforms everything. And that transformation process can look foreign, which is then again labeled as some kind of mental illness. And in saying that, and in professionals telling us that, and us believing that, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And he says we're starved for deeper meaning and significance, and something about having mystical experiences. Well, there's people out there having mystical experiences, but when they do, they're slapped with a mental illness. So it's demystified by giving it all that kind of terminology. And I wonder if at some point I'll get reacquainted with the mystery. And he gives a quote by Percy Walker in The Moviegoer or something, and talks about to become aware of the possibility of search is to be onto something. And I feel like when we get in touch with map consciousness, we have a sense that we're onto something. But then everyone around us tells us that we're not. We are having some symptoms of mental illness, but I feel that it might resonate with a lot of us to really feel like we were onto something, and maybe moving into those possibilities. And the second part of the quote was not to be onto something is to be in despair. Well, to go with that too, to be onto something and then be told you have a mental illness is really to be in despair. And he says our society, our social structures are organized in a way that is oppressive to way too many of us. And that is so true, and I've talked about that a lot, and how it creates a certain percentage of people guaranteed to come down with a supposed mental illness. But to me, and what I've talked about too, is being in that despair actually turns on this process of the brain starting to create meaning, because if it doesn't, it realizes it could be the end of the organism. Because the organism in despair could end the organism. So some kind of meaning mechanism comes in sometimes in this process of so-called mania or map consciousness, and is sort of a lifesaver in a way. And it sort of could be looked at in how when we go in fight or flight and there's a really dangerous situation, sometimes we can do feats of strength that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. You hear the stories of people lifting a car off of somebody who's trapped under a car or something like that, when they wouldn't be able to do that normally, but since somebody needed that, and since it was a must, that person had the extra strength. And I might have talked about that too, about how, what is it that sees, and to me, perception beyond the ego, the clear perception, sees that situation and is able to calculate the strength the body would need in order to lift the car. Anyways, I feel like this hyper meaning making process could be a similar situation where normally our brain isn't really seeing and making that much meaning. It's sort of lost in the meaninglessness of society, and it's repetitive, so we become habituated to it, and it becomes even more meaningless, even if it had some kind of meaning at some point. So in the same way, the brain kind of goes into this feat of strength of making so much meaning and seeing so much meaning that it's a spark of energy and of seeing that there is meaning in life, and it can kind of save a life at a certain point. And it can even save the lives of people who have gone into those states and say are diagnosed with bipolar, and they know that at some point they're going to have this amazing, meaningful state, and that could actually save some people from the days when it feels very, very depressing. And I don't know if that's true, but to know that there'll be some days that are just so incredible it makes the ones that are so awful somewhat bearable. It's sort of like how people can do really crappy jobs if they know they have a really good vacation coming up. So that state of mania where everything feels so amazing can save consciousness from destroying the body in lower states of consciousness. And that's not all of it. It's just maybe a small factor. And to me, there's no reason why we can't all live in those really beautiful states of consciousness all the time. Because we are consciousness, and what we experience is based on that level of consciousness. So in high levels of consciousness in mania, we experience a beautiful world. In low levels of consciousness, we experience a pretty crappy world. And then there's the consensus level of reality, which is a level of consciousness, which creates a certain world. And some of us sort of go up and down in states higher or lower than that prevailing level of consciousness. And when we're higher, we seem too happy. And when we're lower, we seem too sad. But really, it's just we're not these consistent egos. We're actually levels of consciousness. We're actually consciousness. So those higher levels of consciousness are trying to get work done through action of the human nervous system in the higher states of consciousness. And also just having a brain go in that state, it changes the whole brain of humanity to have some people seeing in that way. So that's a long-winded thing, and I could probably go on, but I can see how that kind of works. So it's really important to keep one's state of consciousness higher, not what can I do to please my ego and reinforce that. And I'll quote Jason Silva when he says, I think we need to rethink this whole picture of how we organize our lives, come out with better symbolic structures that allow our psyches to merge with some higher meaning. And that quote is exactly what I'm talking about with self-dialogue, is creating other symbolic structures through words and dialogue and talking to oneself. And that context of meaning, even if it's subjective, this context of meaning is particular to this being here, and maybe some of it resonates with other beings. But the trouble is we sort of try to attach ourselves to meanings that are given to us by society, and we don't actually make them ourselves. And so by making this structure of meaning myself, for myself, with myself, by myself, it's creating that structure he's talking about to allow the psyche to connect to more meaning. And we sort of rely on society to do this for us. I really feel like Jason Silva speaks my language. And I've talked about lifestyle design and how do I need to create my life and design my life or organize my life in order to come up with these other symbolic structures, blah, blah, blah. But I feel the way I organize my life moving forward has to be in alignment with the values of map consciousness, which is that state of consciousness where everything felt meaningful and those values are operating. And they're not values that are given by society, but they're values that we can discover within ourselves. And we feel them, but a lot of times what happens is we don't actually act based upon those values because they're the values of our nervous system, but the values we've been given by society come in and superimpose over that. So we might look at somebody and feel like we want to give them a hug, but society comes in, oh, I don't know if I should give them a hug. So every time we do that, it's a shock to the nervous system because it has this natural spontaneity like we had as children that is written over by the rules of society. But when we can question that, we can actually get in touch with the values of our actual neurology, which flux and flow and can change in the moment. The thing of being a human being is we're very adaptable. So can we be that fluid to really adapt to be with the moment and actually be the moment? Can we be the moment and not the me? Because the me is actually the noise superimposing itself over the moment and making us feel like we're missing something and not in touch with the moment. And that's what we're missing, is the moment. And then at the end, he gives the National Suicide Prevention line. And I bet you anything, if you call that, you could get yourself in the system and on meds pretty darn quick. So yeah, it could be valuable, but I would only put that up there if one has actually tried it for oneself and been helped, perhaps. And that's another thing with the self-dialogue. I have trouble connecting with society sometimes. So if I have this strong connection and relationship with myself, then I'm sort of relating with myself in my own world and making that more mirrored in my brain, I guess. And it's true, it affects my reality. If I wasn't doing an hour or 2 or 3 of talking to myself and editing the videos a day, I could be out with people. So I'm definitely neglecting society just by virtue of spending time talking to myself instead. And it's almost like a lot of times I'd rather just talk to myself because some of the other stuff can be difficult. And I don't know if that's right or wrong, it's just sort of what's happening. So I didn't intend to spend a whole video talking mainly about one 3-minute Jason Silva video, but that's what happens when I watch 3 minutes of something, it turns into 30 minutes of something of my own. And that's why I have to be selective. But I watched that video and then I was thinking, oh my gosh, there's a lot there. So that could be key. Is it an experience or is it reality? If it's something we recognize, then it's something based on past experience and it's not reality. And last thing, I feel like meaning making is the cure and not the disease. Yet when we go into this hyper meaning making state and we're making and seeing meanings other than the ones given to us by society, and our perceptions have changed because of that, we are said to have some kind of brain disease, when really I feel like the meaning making is the cure for the dis-ease. We are in dis-ease of society, and so this meaning making process gets activated in the brain to hopefully save humanity in a way, save the individual organism, and if people are able to harvest that and translate it into something people can understand, then maybe other people don't have to go through that meaning making process in the same way, because it can be very challenging. And the thing is too, if people are able to connect with some of those meanings, then it will make life less meaningless for other people. And then that will eliminate or reduce the need for other people to go through this meaning-making transformation. It'll just be sort of the fabric of society at some point. And that's enough about that video.